All right, now ahead of World Hunger Day, a staggering reality faces our nation. While shelves are full, millions of stomachs are empty, high food prices are actively driving a severe hunger crisis across South Africa. Joining us now to unpack the depth of this crisis is Andrew Bennie, a food sovereignty activist with the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign and a sociology researcher at Wits University. Good morning, Andrew. Welcome to News and Views on Salam Media.
Hi, good morning, Zahid, and good morning to your listeners. Just a quick correction. I'm actually I'm the climate policy and food systems researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice.
All right, got that. Your research indicates that South Africa's hunger crisis is far worse than the general public realizes. What are the primary driving factors making food so inaccessible right now?
So, I mean, just to say, in terms of the scale of the crisis, the most kind of comprehensive research that we have from the Human Sciences Research Council is that 63.5% of households in South Africa experience some form of food insecurity, which is about 40 million people or so. Um, and there's various types of food insecurity, but pretty much that means that only about 37% of households actually experience full food security. And that's quite a stark contrast in a country where we produce more than enough food to feed our population. We export a lot of food and we produce an amazing array of food. So there's a deep contradiction in terms of that. It's not a food availability problem. The food's there. We produce enough food. The problem is access to that food. So to get to your question about what's behind it, I mean, the immediate causes of food insecurity are in the context where most people in South Africa depend for most of their food access on purchasing food. Um, it's a combination of people's incomes are too low, but also that food prices are too high. So it's a combination of those two things that determine whether people access their food, whether they have money in their pockets, and what those food prices are.
Mm. When we look at the contemporary issues in South Africa, we're talking about inequality, we're talking about unemployment, poverty. How do those then feed into the insecurity, food insecurity that we're speaking about?
Exactly. I mean, when we look at our unemployment figures, persistently around 42%, those must also be seen in the context of South Africa being the most unequal country in the world. And that's a major part of our persistent hunger, is that as long as we have this level of inequality, and without government intervention to either address that inequality and or to in the more immediate term provide some sort of relief in terms of that inequality to households who are suffering from poverty, we are going to continue to have this hunger. And so obviously part of the reason that many households just don't have the income to afford a nutritious diet is unemployment, and that they just don't, and that's the main reason that they just don't have money in their pockets. There are other ways that obviously people get money in their pockets, like social grants and so on, and that's therefore obviously part of the solution. But the food crisis and the hunger crisis in South Africa definitely can't be separated from our inequality crisis. And that also means that addressing hunger and food insecurity and also measures to address high food prices, policy interventions to address high food prices, are a critical part of any broader program to address inequality in South Africa.
Yeah, I mean, we'll look at the policy decisions and how those could then improve or contribute to worsening situation when it comes to food insecurity. But just before that, we look at it as a supply issue. But clearly, this is an economic and a structural problem. So I'm just wondering, how are food prices specifically then reshaping dynamics in vulnerable communities, in households in those communities, and how people get by from a day on a day-to-day basis?
So I mean, part of it is, there isn't a problem with the supply of food, but part of how prices are transmitted, so um, how prices are transmitted from upstream of retail to consumers is part of the issue. So there's pricing dynamics in the supply chain that shape food prices at the end. And pretty much I mean, some of the latest research we have is showing that, um, price spikes at farm level don't necessarily translate into um, price spikes at retail level because number one, farmers don't have the power to charge higher prices when their input costs increase. And so, but the actors that have the power to pass on higher prices are in processing and retail. And that raises the question of the structure of the supply chain, therefore, and especially questions of corporate concentration and power. But ultimately, that means that at the consumption end, just to come back to your question about dynamics on that end, is that again going back to our question of inequality, when food prices rise, because for low-income households, I mean, high food prices, especially given the rate at which they've been rising, is for it's only a privileged small percentage of households that for whom higher food prices isn't too much of a concern. So it affects from low income to middle income and upper middle income even. Um, but basically, with especially low income households spend a much larger proportion of their monthly budget on food. And so when food prices rise, the proportional impact in terms of how much more food therefore takes of a household's budget is much higher for low income households than for low income households than high income households. So there's also essentially an exacerbation of existing inequalities. And so without interventions, we're just allowing existing inequalities, which are already stark, to be even more exacerbated. The second thing also is that high food prices have critical nutritional um, impacts, in the sense that with low income households, the patterns that we see, like with the Peter Marisburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group, who track prices monthly on supermarket shelves in low income areas, uh, one of the key patterns they find is that when food prices rise, low income households prioritize your less nutritious but more filling starchy staples like your maize meal and bread and so on. And then with the money left over, they'll purchase the vegetables and the fruits and so on. So when prices rise, you then also have lower nutritional diversity and therefore nutritional impacts there, which is especially important in terms of the impact on the development of children and child nutrition.
Andrew, Salilo here. I just wanted to ask just briefly on government interventions. There's been numerous ones. The SRD, grant that was introduced during the COVID, era. I know it was later extended. There was also, there's also the child grants and numerous other grants, old age grants in them. Did you see an impact from them? Are they making a difference? Or a dent into food insecurity in the country? What trends are you seeing with how they're used and the impact
Mm.
that they have on people?
I mean, social grants they've been critical in staving off devastation for many households, for the millions of people who receive social grants, the child support grant, the pension, and so the SRD grant, the social relief of distress grant. But in themselves, the current value isn't enough to help households achieve food security. So that is something, earlier I mentioned that in order to achieve food security for households, that we require interventions in two places. One, to raise people's incomes. Number two, to manage food prices. So if we're looking at raising incomes, obviously social grants are a critical aspect to that, and there's been strong calls to raise the value, especially of the child support grant, to raise the value of the child support grant, at least to the food the initially the minimum food poverty line, and then the upper bound food poverty line, because at the moment the grant value is below the food poverty line. And the child support grant is a especially critical one to raise because number one, we're seeing increased stunting rates amongst children,
Mm.
malnutrition amongst children. The Department of Health is recording at the moment about 10,000 child deaths per year are linked to acute malnutrition. Um, and so I mean, this is like the crux. If we're talking about the hunger and food insecurity crisis in South Africa, kind of the kind of most stark place to look at it is at the child nutrition part of it. And that is part of that is that has massive implications when a child doesn't get good nutrition in the first thousand days of its life, as well as in its first few years, the impacts of that developmentally and so on can never be recovered. So again, then you're talking about the future of our children, you're talking about the reproduction of inequality, because now those children who are suffering from these stark levels of malnutrition can never catch up with children from better off households and so on. But just to speak to those solutions, I mean, so raising incomes through social grants, introducing a universal basic income is a critical intervention, and the IEJ has done work showing how specifically how introducing a universal basic income from evidence of experience in other parts of the world has critical positive impacts on food security. But I just want to say one thing. I mean, addressing this food insecurity crisis, and this isn't to oversimplify the issue, but addressing this food insecurity crisis isn't complex or difficult. We just need to look at Brazil, where they were off the FAO hunger map before the right-wing government of Bolsonaro came in. He came in, he removed many of the programs that were the reason for that, and hunger shot up in Brazil. Lula came back into power. Within 2 years, Brazil was removed from the FAO's hunger map. In those 2 years, they removed 40 million people from food insecurity status into only 2 years. The point is that you can do that in only 2 years if you have the political commitment, the coordination and the plans and the resources. And so talking again about what can immediately be done by government, number one, you have raising the value of social grants, introducing a universal basic income. Number two, there's programs like the 10 Best Buys campaign, the Go Great campaign, that have called for government and supermarkets to work together to essentially provide, to remove markups of key 10 nutritious food items. Nothing's happened there from supermarkets and government, despite the fact that a solution has been presented. They're just not taking it up. You have more direct measures in places like Mexico, where similar to the Best Buys campaign, but the key thing is that the state has taken the initiative to get supermarkets to cap prices of 24 nutritious food items. So a basket of 24 nutritious food items at 910 pesos. That's had a critical role to play in preventing or in lowering food price inflation. And I mean, there's many other interventions that government could be taking that we could talk about if we have time. But it's just to show that there are immediate interventions that can be done. It's just been announced recently also that the UK government is trying to get supermarkets also to cap prices on a basket of nutritional food. So there's very immediate policy interventions that can be done and lay the basis also for longer term programs to really end food insecurity and hunger once and for all.
But also, let's not forget that food is a constitutionally enshrined right for South Africans, right? So, yeah, of course. I mean, when it comes to finding solutions and implementing them, very important. But Andrew, I do think we need to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll continue with this discussion. Please do stay with us.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
Qurbani is an act of worship, a sacrifice made for the sake of Allah. But for some families, it may be the only time all year they are able to have meat. A simple meal, shared, remembered, longed for. This Eid, your Qurbani can reach them. From just 1,300 Rand, you can provide Qurbani meat to families in over 30 countries. Make your Qurbani count for them. Give Qurbani, give love with Islamic Relief.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042 203 1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Give the gift of clean water with Africa Muslims Agency. With every water well or borehole you donate, your drop becomes a river, reconnecting communities to nourishment, education, dignity and empowerment. Sponsor a water well for 17,000 Rand in Africa or a borehole for 65,000 Rand in Afghanistan or Africa. Quench the thirst. Reconnect the soul with Africa Muslims Agency.
Are you banking with convenience, transparency, and flexibility? With Al Baraka Bank's transactional banking account, you can enjoy convenient everyday banking designed around your needs. Benefit from zero fees on point-of-sale transactions and manage your banking easily through Al Baraka's secure mobile banking app and internet banking platform. From everyday payments to managing your personal or business banking, Al Baraka makes banking simple, transparent, and convenient. Visit albaraka.co.za to learn more. Al Baraka, your partner bank. Al Baraka Bank Limited is an authorized financial services and credit provider.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
Welcome back. You're tuned into News and Views on Salam Media with myself, Zai Jadwat, co-host Salilo Makudiri, right over there on the other end of this desk. Just before the ad break, we were speaking about food insecurity, and our guest this morning is Andrew Bennie, a food sovereignty activist and senior researcher in climate policy and food systems at the Institute for Economic Justice. Andrew, before the break, we were discussing some of the interventions that could be put into place as far as the government is concerned when it comes to alleviating food insecurity. But I'm just wondering, when it comes to grassroots activism and solutions, what can what can communities and ordinary citizens do to participate in actively creating localized food systems? Andrew?
Hello?
Yes, Andrew, are you with us? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that.
All right. Okay, there seemed to be a bit of a dip in the connection there, but thankfully you're back. So we were speaking about solutions earlier on, and we were speaking about what the government can do. But during the ad break, I was just wondering, what is it that ordinary citizens can do as far as tackling food insecurity is concerned? You know, what are some of the activities and initiatives that ordinary citizens and communities can take to create localized food systems?
I mean, that's the thing. Addressing food insecurity and hunger does require societal effort. I think, speaking about government's role isn't to, some people might feel a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to say, why must government do everything? But I think government does have a critical role to play in terms of enabling things. So, like, for example, if we're talking about what citizens can do, and there are many examples of citizens doing this already in terms of creating local food systems, using land to create local community gardens. There's already, despite being structurally marginalized, there's still a lot of over 2 million smallholder farmers of various types, backyard gardeners to those farming on smaller plots of land in rural areas. And so there's these sort of seeds of alternatives all over the place, if you will, where people are creating sort of local food networks from production, linking local production to local consumption, local markets, and so on. And so more localized food systems is a critical part of both addressing food insecurity and providing more nutritious and affordable food. That is really critical, and there's also important work that's been done by those like Mark Wegerup and so on kind of, if you could call it, people's food systems, of how actually outside of the public eye, when we think of the food system, we think of just the big supermarkets and so on, which are dominant, but also there's a whole sort of food system happening on the ground that's been organized by informal traders, small traders, and so on. So yeah, there's that aspect in terms of citizens taking action to build local food systems is really critical. Again, you do still, when even in my work and the networks I'm in of working on these things, you do still, there's still constraints on them that often still relate to government. So if you're talking about strengthening local food systems, then one of the key things you need to talk about is access to land. Again, that's very often where government needs to come on board. Also, access to water, again, especially where local government needs to come on board. So it does need definitely a societal effort, but all sort of sectors need to play their part.
And you speak about government a lot, and I'm sure as civil society, you guys have engaged with them on numerous fronts. Do you get a sense that they are grasping the reality on the ground? They understand just how bad things are and just how many people in South Africa are going to bed on empty stomachs? Do you get a sense, maybe from the Department of Social Development or anyone along the hierarchy that you've engaged with?
Yeah, I mean, they do very much so. So I mean, like the survey I mentioned earlier, the survey by the Human Sciences Research Council on food insecurity in South Africa was commissioned by the Department of Agriculture to get a better picture of exactly an updated picture of food insecurity stats in South Africa, and a better picture of their spatial geographical location and so on, in order to help inform interventions and policy interventions. So very much government is concerned with it. I think there's a few constraints though. One is departmental coordination. So addressing the food insecurity crisis, like you mentioned, social development, it does require coordination between different departments. And that's quite often what we see in food security policy in South Africa, is a missing element, so that you have this cohesive, coherent, cross-governmental approach and common platform of a common approach to the issue. The second issue is then, translating that awareness of the scale of the crisis into urgency. So we've seen, for example, with the National Food Nutrition Security Plan, we had the first plan that was supposed to run from 2018 until 2023, but it was largely, it was hardly operationalized. There's been the development of a new National Food Nutrition Security Plan that also a number of civil society organizations have been quite involved in. There is now a delay. I mean, we've already passed the timelines that it was supposed to have been finalized and then consulted on and then starting to be implemented. And we're seeing delays there. And so there is, like I say, a need to translate that awareness into more urgency. I think the third issue also is to translate that awareness into proactivity and imaginative approaches as well. What I was saying earlier about, Brazil's ability to so drastically reduce food insecurity is also because of a certain level of imagination and a whole set of different multiple interventions that are coordinated. So there's no one silver bullet solution to food insecurity. It requires multiple levels of interventions. Also with food prices, there's no one intervention on food prices. It requires a sort of toolbox, if you will, of interventions, but coordinated interventions. And I think there does just need to would be great to see from government side a greater energy, imagination, enthusiasm in trying new things. Often that does also need to be backed up by financial support, fiscal support. So it does also require government devoting resources to these things, including to the evaluation of the 2018 to 2023 National Food Nutrition Security Plan. One of the key things it noted was that there just wasn't sufficient budget devoted to its implementation. So government needs to back up its plans also with sufficient budget and obviously the good use of that budget. So there are, government's aware of the problem, but we do definitely need to see more.
Yeah, a lot to do, and I think it's good that we are finally recognizing just the gravity of the situation. And just in closing, where do you see that balance between state intervention and societal initiative?
I think the balance is to, the state needs to be proactive in addressing food insecurity, and part of that proactivity is to also recognize what people are already doing and also support that. And I think the informal food trading sector provides a good example of what I mean there. At the moment, informal food traders are actually occupy quite a large or supply a large amount of food to households in South Africa, despite their low resources, structural marginalization, and so on. But often when we see it both in government speak, but also especially in local government action, a sort of framing of informal traders almost as a problem. So there's a problem of compliance, of ensuring they adhere to regulations, those sorts of things, rather than a language of support. How do we support them to meet certain standards and so on, but also just how do we support the standards they're already meeting, especially around nutrition and so on, and food prices. A lot of informal traders, they play a critical role in food security because of their accessibility, but also, again, research by Dr. Mark Wegeruth and his team is showing that they're often providing food at much lower prices than the formal sector, like supermarkets and so on. But often we see government attempts, like last week in Johannesburg, the raids on informal traders in the inner city. We see that sort of action and a big hullabaloo about that sort of action. It would be nice to see a big hullabaloo about supportive action, rather to see them as an integral part of the urban infrastructure and a critical part of the urban food security infrastructure, particularly. And that means creating safe, amenable market spaces for informal traders, for example, which isn't just for them, it's critical also for households. So ensuring that within regions, within municipalities, that there's, for example, a certain amount of space allocated to public market space for fresh food space. So in other words, supporting, so just to answer your question, that balance, I think it's about government taking seriously what people are already doing, that the actions they're already taking that are important to food security, and government engaging with that and supporting that.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and sharing your insights on, I think, what is quite an urgent situation regarding food insecurity in South Africa.
Deeply. Thank you for having this
That
discussion.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
That was Andrew Bennie, Senior Researcher in Climate Policy and Food Systems at the IEJ. That's the Institute for Economic Justice. Andrew, thank you for your insights this morning. So that conversation leaves us with quite a powerful truth to sit with regarding hunger in South Africa. It's not a failure of food supply. It's actually a structural failure of access policy. And we really need to have this conversation and go deeper into it in coming days, weeks, and months ahead. All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we return, we look ahead to the season of Udhiya, and we take a brief look at the upcoming Ashraful Eid Qurbani campaign. Stay with us.